You have to be just boldened to be able to kind of have the tough conversation that needs to be said to be able to break through some of those roadblocks.
Welcome to the next episode of Business Blind Spots Exposed, the podcast. Click the subscribe button and follow us. Listening. All right, I'm excited. Hi everyone. We've started the next new podcast or the next new episode of the Business Blind Spots Exposed podcast. And today I've got a special guest with me, Scott Steckel. Let me tell you a little bit about what this podcast is focused on. So I run a company called Carmo, and we build cultural intelligence, which is all about improving the outcome of the cultures for the employees and senior management and customers, and ultimately the profitability of a company. And it's all based on data. But the data helps you understand things, but there are blind spots. I know for myself, I've had plenty of blind spots, the stuff that I didn't know that has kind of come and smacked me in the face. So the purpose of this podcast is to start discovering and understanding from different people's perspectives what those blind spots are. So today I've got Scott Steckel, who is the president of the National Pest Management Association, is also a director at Plunkett's Pest Control. Scott, how are you doing today?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I will tell you, Scott, every time I have called and talked to you, you have been a fantastic resource and been incredibly kind in sharing. So I really wanted to have a chance to get everyone else to share time with you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
So let me set a little bit of ground rules here. So this is a live podcast. There are people who are going to be online, live on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. Throughout the course of this, anyone's is capable of putting comments in based on the conversation that we're having. I'd love for it. But I'd like to start out with anyone who's online live. Tell us where you're from. Where are you sitting right now that you're dialing and connecting from? But with that said, Scott, you've been in and around the pest control industry for some time now. Tell me about the beginning of your journey. Where did it start? Did you end up where you intended? Was this the route that you'd expected in terms of your business career and progress?
So there's kind of two lives within one person. So I'll start with the fact that I'm one of those folks that entered the industry as a child. So I'm multi-generational. So my grandfather and my father before me were in this industry. So I knew it from the inside and loved it. So we got the chance to go to the National Pest Management Association meetings, wherever they happened to be each year, and had my family's friends and therefore their children and therefore my friends, and just found this to be a great industry from a relationship and friend point of view. But again, the one thing that happened is I kind of go back in time. I was in high school just about the time when the space race was happening, and I had a good friend that had to know at the point was astronaut and then Senator John Glenn. And kind of in talking with him, it was one of those aha moments. Hey, could I be an astronaut? And the answer was, sure, Scott, here's what you got to do. And so I took the one divergent path away from the industry for a little bit, went to the Air Force Academy for college, then went straight into flight school and then became kind of a pilot from there, going on the journey of trying to get into the space program. So that was the initial right turn. And I'm sure from my dad's perspective was a little bit of, oh gosh, we have a business here that we'd like to pass along and maybe it's not going to happen. And then family from that perspective of, oh, well, he's found something else to do. And it sounds like pretty much a fun gig. So let him go at it. So I had these kind of competing interests going along there. So kind of an answer to that second question is, I didn't stay in the military for my entire career because my father had a heart attack. And at that point, I had the tough question to kind of ask, could I do both? And the answer is you couldn't. I didn't see a way to do that. So I decided to pull out of active military and went into the Guard, and then moved back home to Columbus, Ohio, to be able to do both what I was in the military as a pilot, flying the KC-135 in-flight refueling, as well as moving back home, being able to support my parents who needed some adult support. At that point, Dad stayed healthy and lived for a number of years, and it was a great mentoring relationship that I had from that point on. But it was nonetheless a career decision to leave the kind of path of flying / astronaut to going back into civilian world. And so that's when, I guess, now to answer the direct question is, I had a plethora of choices. Coming out of the military, I had people pulling at me from large corporations to, obviously my dad had a bunch of small businesses that were in there. But the one thing that's very differential, so it's going to be one of those aha moments, is my dad, while I was away at the Gulf War in the 1990 timeframe, sold the business to Waste Management. So he was one of a multitude of the roll-up that happened a generation ago, leaving me in the position where if I got out of the military and I wanted to be in the pest control industry, I had to start fresh. So we did. We literally, from ground zero, started a business, bought a business, grew the business, merged with another business, and then grew for 23 plus years until the 2018 timeframe where my partners and I sold. And I stayed in the industry, certainly. So when we sold to a private company, and I still work with them today as an employee.
Gosh, lots of thoughts going through my head. And once again, anybody on live, I'd love for you to just tell us where you're calling in from. Just say what city or what state you're coming in from. Scott, I'm hearing lots of different threads there, and I always love hearing people's story because it's never usually a straight line.
Correct.
Ever. So I want to eventually get to blind spots, because blind spots are the things that kind of catch you off guard. Talk to me about. I saw that you'd flown T-38s for a little while, and thank you for your service. I did a lot of work in and around DoD for a number of years myself. What did you learn, or what experiences, what knowledge did you gain by being in the military that is applied to what you do today or in the last couple of years or building your business?
So the one thing that the military does very well is it takes young people and gives them autonomous leadership opportunities that really small business really does like-minded things, where very large corporations do not. Large corporations are very hierarchical and very much driven, where the multitude of layers, it's just kind of hard to progress through, where the military and then small business thrives on young independent leadership with given autonomy. Go, here's the task, go do it. Certainly ask for permission before you do something silly, but there's not a whole lot of mountain of paperwork you have to get through to get it done. So that was a really good, encouraging lesson for me as a young person in my military career that transitioned well into my civilian career. So I'll let you continue with that kind of thread.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because having worked in and around DoD for a number of years, either being as a government civilian with clearances or as a contractor, I remember working as a contractor for a captain who was probably 28 years old and had a team of 48 people working for him. I was like, wow, I wish I'd had that opportunity at 28 to be able to, and the kind of budget that he commanded was a non-trivial number.
That's right. Absolutely.
And that exposure gave him, in that case, a lot of visibility into roles that he may not, directors at companies 20 years his senior may not have necessarily had the opportunity. So right. It exposed you to a lot, is what I heard.
I'll translate that from not only seeing the nuts and bolts of how to run it, but it was really good examples of what I call servant leadership. Mm-hmm. That was the classic thing that I think that most military people come away with, no matter whether they're an NCO or they're an officer. So it's irrelevant of that. is that you're given leadership responsibilities, and you learn pretty quickly what works and what doesn't. Because if you're kind of heading off in the wrong direction, people will smack you around, and they will kind of do this, kind of beat you up from a hey point of view. Don't do this. You're killing the team, and you don't want to do that. So you learn pretty quickly what to do and what not to do. And then it kind of repeats itself, if you will, in the civilian world, but much more, if you will, it's really subtle. The private industry doesn't share with you that brutal honesty that the military does. I wish that were translatable, but I yet haven't found it really very common. When I have read a book called Crucial Conversations, the one thing that came out of that was you have to be just bolden to be able to kind of have the tough conversation that needs to be said to be able to break through some of those roadblocks. And the military has that with spades. Civilian world today just doesn't give you that option. It's kind of like a one and done. If you make a mistake, you're kind of put in the penalty box for a little bit. And you learn quickly to kind of be quiet, sit on the sidelines. And that's not a good, healthy leadership kind of thought. Is you've got to be understanding that you trust people until they can prove that they can't be trusted. Start with that kind of caveat. And then second, give them all the tools to be able to get their job done and then get out of their way. Because if you're of the mindset as a leader where you have to do everything and you are the shell answer person, everybody comes to you, you become the kind of pinch point of your entire organization. And you've got to get past that ego-driven, hey, I'm the leader here. Well, leader is just the opposite of that. You have to let everybody else lead too. So.
Great points in there. Jerry McCormick writes in, I haven't really thought about military leadership and small business leadership being similar. Interesting concept. I agree, Jerry. So he says, Scott Steckel is making a great point. I agree. That whole idea of being given such large scope of responsibility in the military and kind of saying, look, this thing is much bigger than you. Once you start to look at that bigger than you kind of vision, you start saying, I need some help here, right? I need some support.
Absolutely.
And that's where you're leaning into others to actually amplify what you actually get done. I think that's what I'm hearing from you.
Well, absolutely right. So, and how that translates into the civilian world, and specifically into our industry, that's the one thing that I will say clearly helped me stay in the industry and has given me the greatest sense of satisfaction. And that is, if I go to any kind of industry meeting, there's a hallway gathering and it's all social. Nope. It's actually networking, and it's problem solving, and it's question and answer sharing. And I learn almost more in the hallway than I do in the classroom, right? I have to do the classroom stuff, right? We all do, because that's where the education is done. And that's more, I think, of the tactical education. What are the bugs? What's the life expectancy? What are the treatment methods? What's the materials? Those things. But then it's like, well, there is not really a course on how to run your business. So that's where you sit side by side with somebody out in the hallway and you go, well, how do you do this? What's your model? And then you're like, well, it's kind of interesting. Almost everybody has a different way to build the mousetrap, in the sense that you're like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. So that's kind of the take-home point about this industry is realize that you are the master of your domain, but you don't know everything. And so it's best to start asking your peer group for what do they do and why. Because if you can understand why they do it, then you're not going to be able to match exactly their style or their process, but you don't have to. You can make it your own and do it your way, but at least you've got the best nuggets out of what you've learned from others, and you can implement that. And that's what I call the constant and steady improvement that we all ought to be striving for. So it's not necessarily, again, in my view, not necessarily the right answer, but I don't try to compete against my next nearest competitor in size or location, because I can't do what they do, and I don't try to be what they are. What I do is I know what they're doing that's really well, and I will try to see how I can use some of those skills and some of the things that I can learn from them. But then I'm going to try to incorporate my own culture, my own business philosophy, so that our team feels like it's still us instead of we're just copying somebody. No, we don't want to do that. So we will then bring this new, whatever this, it's a process improvement, it's a structural improvement, so that at any given time, whether I use the EOS program or the book Traction as an example here, where you just have your rocks. And so familiar words, more down to the real earth is you have your quarterly goals. Instead of having 100 lists, you've got a list of 4 or 5 things that are actual targeted, very simple to isolate. You don't have these random samples of squirrel and you're off on another chase and never getting anything done. So, and you've got accountability because of that, because you've got a finite list and you've got it where everybody knows what that list is and it's been published. You stay true to the fact and you get from A to Z, and at the end of the quarter, you got completion. Then you look at your next list. What am I going to do next? And those are the kind of things from the industry's point of view that I've learned the greatest amount from. Well, I visited another company every year. That was a goal. Find somebody double my size. Why double? Well, that way at least I could see a little far out beyond the time horizon of what I think I should be, because I can't quite envision what I need to do to get there. So now I get to, for 3 days or so, I get to go visit and see somebody in action doing exactly what they're doing in their own style. And I'm like, wow, okay, now I can, instead of it being kind of a philosophical, I can see the time horizon. Now I can physically go, oh, that's doable. If they can do it, I know I can do it. Now I just got to find a way to get from point A to point B and build those rocks to get there.
Gosh, Scott, this is my problem with talking with you. As I start, there's so many, my wheels start spinning so fast when I'm talking to you, and there's so many thoughts that are coming up for me here. So this is good stuff. I've got this analogy that I give to my kids, because my poor kids are always hearing my analogies, and I talk to them. I call it the 9 mountains analogy, and the idea is my job is to protect the village at the bottom in the valley, right, in the bowl in the middle, and if there's no possible way for me to stand, have the perspective on each one of those 9 mountains and understand what you can see from the top of each one of those mountains. But if I can find somebody else who can stand on top of one of those mountains and say, hey, the rain clouds are coming in, the hailstorm is coming in, I win, because they're giving me a perspective that I can't see. So I tell them all the time, hey, it's all about getting greater perspective than what you have, not about saying, I'm the only one who protected the village. And right. What I'm hearing from Courtney here, thanks Courtney for jumping in. She said, our industry is so supportive of each other and has great open lines of communication. We've been able to improve our business because of the connections and others in the industry. I think that's what I'm hearing as a common thread. It's the greatness comes through breadth of perspective. Just seeing someone else who's done it, and you say, I've got something I can make uniquely my own. Is that right?
Absolutely. And everybody that I don't know of anybody that's flip side. Hey, sorry, you're not welcome at my office. Yeah. Everybody that I've asked is like, open arms. When do you want to come? And they're gracious enough. If you come, then you're going to stay at my house, and we're going to go and we're going to have some fun with this. So it's always an enjoyable experience. It's never one of those things you come home and you go like, well, that was a wasted amount of time. I didn't get anything out of that. It was always a great sense of satisfaction. But then, so the kind of turnabout fair play. It's like, okay, well, since you've done that, hey, in the next couple of months, why don't you come visit me? And again, remember, these are typically businesses that are not exactly the same size, and certainly not like on top of each other from a perspective. So there's a little travel involved, and that's where you got to go like, hey, I'm going to reimburse you for that. Well, that's kind. You didn't need to do that. Well, the simple answer is you're paying me huge dividends by doing this. So let me make it at least kind of come see, come saw. I'm going to at least scratch your back in some way, that because I can't give you all the things that you're giving me, but at least I can make it equitable, right? So that's the really heartfelt comparison that I think from our industry's point of view is everybody that I've talked to is always willing to do that. So I'll give another example of something similar is, so we have a group called Associated, and it's literally by invitation only into this group. I've not been a member. I'm just kind of talking it, because that's one of the things, the reason that you join such a group is so that you can have an open dialogue with people, and you can kind of share the secrets, if you will, so you can feel fundamentally safe to say, well, here's my P&L, and have somebody come back and go, wow, here are some things you might want to think about, because I've seen from experience that doesn't work very well, or as there's a better way to build a mousetrap, and here's how I would build it. Likewise, I don't know whether I'm the expert in this area, but I know somebody that I'd love to introduce you to bring you to the table with so-and-so, because if you sit down with 30 minutes with them, that subject will be completely understood, because that's the subject matter expert on that. And you're like, wow, thank you for that introduction. Those are the things that kind of this industry does really, really well. Whether it's one-on-one at an industry gathering, you just randomly find somebody, which is kind of my example with Courtney, kind of midway through this past year, the pandemic year. Courtney and her husband Adam were on a NPMA call, and I happened to be in the same room as them. It was random, and I got to know them kind of serendipitously. And then ever since, we've kind of had this kind of relationship that we've built. So these things start kind of impromptu and then develop over time, because this is an industry about relationships. It's never a one and done.
So we tried to come up with a topic, sort of a guidepost for what this episode was going to be about, and I call it the past, the present, and the future of pest control by the numbers. Big topic, lots of area latitude here. I think I've heard a little bit of the evolution that you've already been seeing in terms of this, the morphing of the industry, the creation of this community of support in industry. Is that what you've been seeing? Is that what's continuing to happen? Tell me more.
So absolutely. So I'll give you a couple of examples in both the worst case scenario and then flip it over to the best case scenario. So those cases of where I get a phone call from somebody and there's a relationship, and then I get introduced to somebody, it's a one-time mentoring opportunity because somebody's just kind of stuck. And so I get on the phone call and I talk, and their answer is typically they're an isolationist view. I wouldn't talk to any of my nearest competitors because they would know exactly what I do. And I'm like, we need to grow past that. Everybody has the same materials. We all have employees. The service opportunities are very, very similar. So the only secret sauce that we have is none. So please grow past that. And so that was the learning lesson that I had to get for most of what I call our very smallest companies, the 1 to 5 person employee companies that I call the don't trot on me group. They're really driven by suspicion of somebody's going to steal what I do and hurt me with it. And I can tell you from our industry's point of view, that is just completely opposite the view that everybody else feels, because everybody else wants to grow and wants to share in the process, because our industry really can. And I'll just go to a quick example. Having an industry different than anybody else in the sense that you have what I call contractual growth. So think of a wildlife side of the business. Every time I go out and sell it, I'm selling a new customer with a new opportunity. So it's the hamster cage. I got to go find 10 new customers today. Well, I flip it over to my home services. I sell 10 home services. Now I sell 10 more next month. Well, now I've got 20. Why? Because my 10 customers didn't go away. I've been able to keep them, and I've got them on a recurring schedule. That is what's called compounding. And if you look at the finance side of compounding, it doesn't happen very fast. The first couple of years, it really looks like, well, I went from 1 to 20. The next year I went from really small numbers, 20 to 50. And then another end, you went 50 to 100, 150. And then all of a sudden you're starting to see. So an example was when we sold our company, we had 10,000 home contractual contracts. And I'm like, holy cow, when in the world did we get to 10,000 customers from residential customers? Because I'd lost track. I really hadn't looked at that metric, if you would. And all of a sudden, so going back to your numbers point of view, hey, being able to see this, and I'll use the analogy from our friends at ABC in the Texas area. So Bobby, and so think of the Jenkins brothers. They call it stacking nickels. I'll use a different analogy and say I'm tipping dominoes. So think of it as the slow process. I'm going to one nickel per customer, stacking them up, being very patient about how I stack them, sort of tip them over, because I can have attrition as well. And so I don't want attrition. So the longer they stay, the better I am. But in due time, 5 to 10 years down the road, your efforts change from what is a small business to, you'll be surprised, you jump to $5 million. And you're like, where the heck did that happen? And surprisingly, it just, again, the compounding side of it happened so dramatically quiet at the beginning and then so dramatically large in the end that you're just like, this is the greatest industry in the entire world. And I hope to keep it a secret. Nope. Oh, because right now I can tell you from our industry in the last, so going to past, present, and future, past, it was always family owned. There were only two real major, what I call strategic competitors, and that was Terminix and Orkin. That's it. They were the driving largest publicly held companies. Well, now we've got 5 that are in the industry, and they're no longer really small. They're worldwide. And then you think of our privates. We used to have so one of the issues that's happened in the last couple of years is we just looked around and how many pest control companies do we have? There's 19,000 pest control companies in the United States. Well, oh my gosh, that would have never guessed that was the number. Well, how many of those are of significant size? And the answer is dramatically a large number. Well, how could that happen? So years old, so 50 years ago, my grandfather and my father grew the business from 0 to about $8 million over about 50 years. So then I started in the 1990s, and I started from 0, and we grew for 20 years, and we grew to $7.5 million. And you're like, so the time constraint of how fast do we grow starts to escalate. And then I'll give examples like, so some of our kind of neighborhood door knocking companies are some of the fastest growing in our industry. Just crazy growth numbers of, they started less than 5 years ago and they're already at $50 million in residential. And you're like, how in the world do you do that? And the simple answer is, it's going back to that old compounding issue of, hey, if you put a process together and it's repeatable, so scalable, scale allows this to happen, then all of a sudden your business becomes, instead of what I call an incubator business, a one-man operation doing about $500,000, now it becomes a significant business that is life-changing, wealth building, in essence, kind of generational family wealth building.
I want to tease something out that I think I hear between the lines here in terms of the compounding. It's funny because I've always called out the rule of 72s. If you add 1 every month over the course of 12 months, 72 months that you lose if you don't get 1, right? Same sort of compounding concept. The other part of this is sort of the perspectives we were talking about earlier. Is so as things start to accelerate in terms of the growth pattern of these companies as the coming future, you can choose to stay at that 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 employees if you'd like.
Absolutely. And it's an honorable profession. So it's nothing, though, we're not telling anybody they're wrong for staying small, because that's perfect fit for them.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's your choice. So you can go out there and try to figure it out by yourself, which is going to take some time and effort.
Sure. Or
just go ask your neighbor and say, hey, look, I don't see how to do this. And they say, I figured out. It took me about 3 weeks. And you're like, I've been beating my head against a wall for 3 years. Can you tell me how to do this? And it could be the cost of a beer.
Exactly. Yeah. So going back to one of the things that using your kind of rule of the numbers. So one of the things that both the good and bad, if you will, is I call it the rule of 23. Okay. It's common for our industry, and it's a sum of 2 numbers. It is the growth rate of your business in total revenue. So as a percentage, not a raw number. It's not like I go from 5 to 6 million, that's 1. It's the percentage of growth. And then the profit percentage as the second sum of those 2 numbers. So rule of 23 is, if I have 10% growth and 13% profit, I will never outstrip my cash flow. I will never have to go to the bank to ask for a loan to run my business. Likewise, if I'm growing faster than that and I'm having more profit than that, I am going to be pulling some strings where I'm going to get my growth is accelerated to the point where I realize that I'm going to outstrip my cash flow, and I'm going to have to start asking for some help along the way. So if somebody's at 20, that's perfectly healthy. 23 is great. 25 is starting to be kind of a, instead of a yellow, it's starting to turn to a red, like, okay, pump the brakes a little bit. So you're outstretching your physical capacity. So those are some of the kind of things where we talk about, hey, how do you, because obviously I call it the go-go years. When you're first starting out, you're just about wanting to 50% growth rate. I went from 100,000 to 200,000. That's a pretty easy thing to do. When you get to $1 million, to grow from $1 million to $2 million, that's really hard to do. So if you just do that as a percentage, you're like, oh yeah, I can't grow by 100% because I'd have to go to the bank and get a line of credit to be able to pay my payroll.
That's right.
Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pause this for a second here, just because there's a number of people on the phone. I just want to tell you some of the kinds of people that are going to be attending the podcast in the next couple of weeks. On March 16th, I've got Troy Vermillion, a showcase for data-driven HR. We're all in the people business, and that's what Troy does, is help measure and build greater engagement with employees. On March 9th, I've got Jarrell Bonner, unlocking higher performance and engagement in employees. It's, again, back to employees again. How do we provide benefits? How do we provide support and the structure for them to do better? And on March 4th, we've got Mark Friedman, why culture in a company matters. He's been an investor and an advisor to a number of companies and seen lots of high growth. Culture matters. And I think that touches on all the stuff we're talking about here, is building that internal foundation as a company starts at the top. True or false? Absolutely true.
So examples where I have seen old school leadership of it's my way or the highway, or what I call the caustic leader, somebody that's walking around and it's just totally grumpy. And everybody works because it's out of fear. Never going to have the long game in that sense. They will never grow at the same rate that everybody else will. They will have pushback. They'll have sabotage. They will have pain points along the way that will far out measure what they think is a totalitarian leadership style that they think will benefit them. I think getting to a style of, especially now with kind of the new work group. So those that are maybe 50 and older, that's what our parents taught us how to do, and we were used to it. But now as the workforce is now 40s and 20s, in that kind of span, we're going to have a more ideological workforce. They want to have an outside purpose. It's not just working for every day. It's not working for every dollar. It's about having what am I going to do? So this industry, what am I doing? Well, I'm caring for the health and safety of your home and your workplace from nuisance pests. And that's an ideological standard they can live with. And like, I have a mission behind that. And that's where you can get into the heartstrings. And that kind of drives the culture of, okay, this is really why I'm here. And that helps with the kind of the turnover effect, where if it's just about a paycheck, somebody finds a better job someplace else, grass is greener on the other side, they just move on. Where if you get this sense of, hey, this industry is for the betterment of customer, and every day is different. This is not a manufacturing facility where you're doing 1,000 widgets every day and it's the same punch press, one after another, and you just get bored of it. Whether you're a call center person, CSR, there isn't a single phone call that resembles one to the next. Everybody's different. And then you're in the field and you got to do a couple of things. Well, you got to discover how does the customer want to communicate with you? What is the current problem? And then find a solution. And then finally communicating back what my solution was and how did I meet your needs? All those steps in the process have been kind of necessary. And that's the piece that kind of fits in. So I'm going to step back one moment and just kind of say one of the other big things that I think the industry did about 25 years ago that it didn't do before that. It needs to still turn the curve a little bit. There was a professional sales staff, but the professional sales staff was probably 1 to 5% of the total company. And everything about the growth of the company was based on those few individuals. And you either had rock stars and grew meteorically, or you didn't and you stayed fairly stagnant. If you don't build your business on the entire company being a sales force, whether it's the CSR team answering the telephones and being able to provide guidance, and then consultative sales at that level of direct connection with the customer, or the technician in the field being able to be pulled aside by the neighbor next door saying, hey, you were just over there, tell me what you're doing, and then having the consultative sales at the kind of point of opportunity right next door, the clover leafing, if you will. And then both the professional sales staff and the technician sales staff being able to kind of do the, if you will, kind of open consultative sales process of kind of door-to-door sales. I've never seen a company, so I'll use my own company as an example. Back when I had a company called Varmicard before I sold in the 2018 timeframe, and we had a professional sales team, and our sales team from that perspective only did physical on-site sales. We didn't do anything over the telephone. As we moved to Plunkets, we changed 2 ways. We had office staff was able to sell, and we saw a dramatic improvement by having the opportunity for a customer service team, maybe inside sales, if you would, if you want a specialty there, as well as technician and sales team selling from a collaborative perspective. So 100% of the field staff are now the sales team. So instead of this finite group of people, you have this broad entire wedge of the entire company and the culture of the company saying, we all are salespeople. And so when we hire, it changed the view. It used to be literally, I am your salesperson. I would loathe being a used car salesperson. I just don't feel like that fits my personality at all. And it had to have changed when we switched over to Plunkets. We became a culture where we retrained. And sure, there were some people that decided that wasn't a fit for them because we had sold them the idea that you're a technician only. That was bad on us. I don't encourage anybody to go down that same path. So then there were some, as new blood came in and as the old blood kind of figured it out that, hey, I'm really getting equal amount of attention on my service quality as I am in the sales growth. I'd better spend an equal amount of time in this area to be able to get my pay at a commensurate level. And all of a sudden, once that kind of light bulb pops on and everybody starts to kind of carry their equal weight, we saw a dramatic improvement in the growth of the company. So I'll give you an example. So there's 2 metrics that we follow. Now it's sounds like funny KPIs. Well, hundreds of them. Well, the simple answer is there's really 2 major ones, and one is net contract gains or loss on any given month, and the second is customer reviews as an NPS kind of equivalent.
Yep.
So what's my score? And those are the 2 that everybody gets to see. And so it goes back to your finance team will have KPIs relative to their P&L and their balance sheet. And each HR will have number of hires and turnover and so on. But for the overall company, it's just those 2 pieces. It's about service quality and customer expectation. And if you get those 2 right, everything else becomes pretty simplistic.
There's a word that popped into mind a number of times throughout the course of the last couple of moments of what you were walking through. And that is this word empathy. I mean, especially as you shifted towards this idea of, hey, everybody, I want to be careful in saying not everybody's selling, but everyone is adding, leaning forward with value, right? And in order to be able to lean forward with the value, you got to truly understand, not to convince, simply to understand kind of where the position they're coming from. When you walk to the lady next door or the man next door and they say, hey, what are you doing over there? Why are you asking? What's your curiosity? Well, I saw you spraying some stuff. Are you spraying for mosquitoes? Because I got a mosquito problem. Well, whatever else it is, right? Whatever the situation is. But by leaning in and asking some of the questions and seeing from their perspective what they're seeing, it doesn't become a sale at that point in time because you're kind of inviting them along for the ride.
That's right. So it's first getting over the fear of a stigma potentially of you're called a salesperson. I've never been called a salesperson before, and I kind of have used car negative sales view of that. I don't want to be labeled that, to the point of, you know what? It's not a bad thing. And the first couple of times you try it, you're probably pretty bad at it. I certainly was. So it took lots of effort and many, many tries to get good at it. But once that light bulb comes on, and I'm telling you, it's really only about a 6-month point of view. It is literally a dozen events, so 2 a month, where you're like, okay, I turned from really bad to this is not so bad to this is kind of fun.
Yeah. I have a good friend who keeps talking to me about this idea of inviting people along for the ride, as opposed to trying to convince them, right? Which is what, stereotypical used car salesman, you got to buy that car. Let me tell you why. As opposed to, I see this picture of you and your family going to Disney World, and once COVID is all freed up and stuff, we don't have that problem. Do you see that too? And they say, yeah, you could do it in this car, right? It's a completely different type of conversation, right?
Yeah, and that's the fun part of it changes it from being a task to helping share the story.
Yeah,
that's it. It's helping understand and using their own language. How do they communicate with you? And you're communicating back in their own love language.
Yeah. No, I love that. So we have gone far already and talked about so many things. The focus of this is blind spots, and I've heard a couple of them here already, right? I think one of the first ones is this idea of perspective, and I know for myself personally, there have been lots of times where I just ran smack dab into something 150 times, and then I realized maybe there's a way, better mousetrap to be built here, and I just simply asked somebody else. So I think that's one blind spot that I've heard is gather perspective faster, as opposed to waiting to try to figure it out by yourself. Did I capture that properly?
That's correct. Absolutely. So one of the things that, again, from my perspective was, from our industry's point of view, we know that we're selling pest services. And everybody says, I'm a pest control operator. And the simplest answer is, when I'm hiring, that's the least of which I am looking for from a role perspective and a traits perspective. What I'm looking for is somebody that has human contact, somebody that's warm, somebody that, you use the term empathetic, somebody that can live in the shoes of the person you're sitting with, understanding their predicaments and concerns, and then sharing it in a way that's not condescending of, gosh, what are you worried about that? That's just not a big deal. Well, to them, it is a big deal. And then doing it in a way, and this is the hard part as well, is taking your own personal filter of, well, I personally couldn't afford that, so they probably can't either. They're a single income home, and so they're probably on welfare or whatever, so they can't afford my service. Simple answer is, don't ever limit your customer by your own personal beliefs.
Yeah.
So kind of that's the kind of take home point for me, was that, hey, take your personal ego, check it at the door, walk in with no presumption, and just listen. Kind of shut the mouth, open the ears, let the customer kind of lead you down the path. You'll know the right answer, because experience will tell you, hey, I've done this 100 times before. This works. I don't feel like I'm cheating anybody, because I can, at the end of the day, ask for payment at the end of the service and realize that I'm getting paid a fair wage and the company's getting a fair buck for the amount of time and effort and material being used and the result that we get. So I'm proud of the industry that I work in, and therefore it comes across as more, it resonates more like, hey, trustworthy. And that's what, from our industry point of view, that contact has to be, is somebody that says, I believe that person is out for my best interest, not for out their own personal self-gain.
So another blind spot that I heard, kind of a takeaway message that you've seen, or either experienced or seen with so many others based on your perspective of the industry, is just this idea that don't look at others as competition for you, because because first of all, they're not you.
Right.
Right. To look at others as an opportunity to help each other. I mean, it's a collaborative sort of thing. I personally come from a place of abundance. There's so much work to be done.
Absolutely right.
If I had 800 years, I don't still think I could not get it all done. Right. There's so much to be done. So look at it from a place of abundance. We can do great things together. You do your stuff, I do mine. And that's perfectly okay to exist like that. Right.
Right. And I'll go even one step further. One of the other things that I have found that works really well is there's collaboration in the sense of somebody may be more of a commercial bent to their business, where some other company may be more residential. And so as leads come in, they share. So they're kind of back and forth. At the end of the day, it's two separate companies, two very different business owners, but they've got a shared collaboration because they want to continue to work in the same footprint, and they realize that their service quality is, I'm better at commercial than I'm residential, and I want my customers to be taken care of, and I want to trust. And so I've got this relationship built, and then I have this back and forth trade going on that really is kind of it's cooperative and it's growing. It helps both companies.
Yeah. So a third thing, I'll introduce this one myself, and that is, as I've noticed in my experience, that for the next level of scale. So the story I've told some people is, can you imagine being a coach for a Super Bowl football team,
Sure.
and you can only make decisions 3 days after the play, which you've got no.
Those are the easiest.
Yeah, God, how difficult is it to make decisions when you got to wait 3 days? But yet many people run their companies that way because they can't see what's happening on the ground. And in order to be able to be empathetic, to be able to get the right perspective from what's happening, you need to be able to constantly check in as to what's going on with the company and be able to do that so that you can scale. Am I saying that right?
Yes, absolutely. So kind of where I see that going down the path of, if you don't set goals, the standard bearer, then everybody else is kind of following ambivalently, like, where are we going? There's not a common sense of direction. There's not a common sense of the path or structure to it. And so if you were to ask, there's a little bit of concern on everybody's part, like, I don't know, I'm just doing my very best. Well, that's okay, but that's not a great example for a thriving and striving company. So setting a standard, showing the company this is the direction we're going, so that everybody can see it and live it, and use it as a practical experiential view of it, because that's what we live. We live a story, if you will. The greatest learning is done not from a textbook or not. It's oftentimes a movie or something similar in a life's experience where you can kind of equate to, I've seen that before. And then once you can do that, you can envision or manifest, if you will, the view of, hey, this is what I do, and this is how I get to point A. And once you get everybody kind of bought into that, that's that team collaboration point of view, then you remove a ton of those low hurdle roadblocks that often cause the struggle of young businesses.
Yeah. I found that if you can have, and in order to be able to scale your company, you need to always be on top of, so many people take the time to study their numbers, but the refresh and how fast they study it makes all the difference. I mean, that's back to that 3 days later or 24 days later or 28 days later analogy, right? If you can't call Jack up and say, hey, what you did at 11:11 this morning, we need to change what that outcome is, and it's now 1 o'clock. That's a better way to start thinking about running the company, as opposed to calling 90 days later saying, so you know what you did back in January? And he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? So being able to stay close to your employees or staff, setting expectations as to what their outcomes should be and how they can perform against those outcomes, I think that's the key to scale. Is a little bit of what I'm hearing from you as well, right?
Certainly. So I'll use the antithesis example of, we all hate, not hate, that's a strong word. We all loathe having our direct Department of Agriculture inspector come in and say, okay, I'm here for your annual paperwork examination to make sure that you're abiding by all of our state regulations. And so give me 100 of your invoices and work orders and let me look through them. And you're like, okay. And he comes back and he's all this chicken scratches comes back, and you're like, as a team, you're going to review it, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize, but almost all of our employees are not documenting X. And we all know, because it's been taught, that we should be documenting X. So now I'm having to go back and, okay, well, we don't do training until next Wednesday. Well, no, I should have. So going back to your perspective of having people ride along in the field, have the supervisors side by side with those technicians. Now, I get COVID is kind of one of those unique spots for the last year, but in the normal sense of having the perspective of having somebody not sitting in office and waiting for the paperwork to come back, and then looking for the result of, did we document what we did? The reality is, walk with them in their shoes, in the field, at the time of service, and you will find noticeably glaring errors like, they did not wear their seatbelt in the car. They did not, well, they were driving kind of recklessly. Oh, we don't want that. That's bad reputation, and it's dangerous for the insurance from that point of view, and it's for their own life safety skills. I want them to go home to their wife and their kids at the end of their every day. Well, then flip it even further. You go out there and you're like, okay, he or she ran into this job for X, and they picked a completely wrong material. I wonder where in the world he heard that from. So you got to figure out what's going on with that. Well, yeah, every time I've done this, I've called Joe, and Joe told me this is what I do. I'm like, did you look at the label? Well, no, I just talked to Joe. Well, now I know that I've got a systemic problem of Joe is the new informal leader, and Joe is not teaching the right thing, and now everybody is following Joe's wrong pattern of behavior. So it's going back to getting with them in the field and then finding a way to fix the problem macro level, not just at that unit level of one-on-one. I'm going to teach him that very moment that the better way to do this is X. But I've probably got a more systemic problem within my entire group that I'm probably going to have to kind of revisit as well. And you can't wait for that once a year visit and look at paperwork just to give you that answer.
Yeah. I think it was Peter Drucker who said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, right? So if you're letting all these things happen, just by virtue, you're letting them happen, you're kind of accepting it. So if you can start to measure it, at least you can start to find out what that progress is, and whether it's Joe that they're getting the answers from. Let's change that process and figure out how to make that better. And that's what I think kind of bring maybe some of these concepts together, is this idea or that blind spot of perspective, or inviting them along, saying, look, hey, whoever the tech who looked at Joe and say, here's where I'd like to take you, right? This is the outcome that we're looking for. How can we get there together? It's almost at that point in time, inviting them along for the ride, not selling the employee,
Correct,
but getting them to see the way to see it and the way you see it.
So that's one of the other things about leadership is oftentimes it's not me telling you what to do. It's me kind of providing insight into the world and then sitting back and waiting for you to self-discover, oh, the right path is. And if they come to the conclusion that they came up with the idea, so much the better. I don't need to have told them that. They came to the right conclusion. They went about it the right way. And it's going to trickle down to everybody else that they're the smartest one in the room. So again, going back to that leadership style of, you do not have to be the know-it-all. You don't have to be the sharer of all the training. You don't have to be the one that's out front. You can have everybody else learn it by just giving them the opportunity to kind of self-learn, by just giving them insights along the way and having them then teach back to you what they've learned, and then have it as self-discovery. They've got it on their own, and they're much more proud of that than they are with what they've learned from somebody else.
So, Scott, I don't know if you know, but our time has actually gone pretty quickly here, a lot faster than I'd expected. I've just been kind of paying attention to what you're saying, and I just looked down. So I'd like to ask you to do something for me.
Sure.
We talked about a number of different topics here. Give me 3 take-home messages for someone who might be listening in, who might get a little soundbite out of this. If they are where the industry is going, what are 3 things that you would ask somebody to think about focusing on for the future to see greater success, prosperity, whatever they define as that success?
Number one, I guess, as a business owner, make sure that you put the correct amount of attention on building a culture of sales throughout the entire organization. Okay. So that it is, because growth covers a multitude of sins, I'm not asking that sales drives everything. So it's not the ego side of this. It's the fact is that with growth comes prosperity. With growth comes coverage of bad behavior along the way that can be fixed kind of in the background, because if you're static or shrinking, you're dying. And if you're growing, you can fix it. You can get better over time. So put the right start in place by building a culture where everybody participates in the sales process. Number two, build a culture of that it's collaboration. So not only inside the company, but outside the company. Inside the company from a collaboration point of view, build your next level of leadership as though you were wanting to replace yourself. Now, nobody's really gonna say, hey, I'm gonna retire in 30 years. But the simplest fact is this. If you could build the business so that you could be at work a couple of hours every day and not have 400 phone calls or emails to answer, and because everybody else has been given the autonomy and the structure and the process to be able to do it right themselves, your life as a business owner becomes much easier and much happier. So start early with developing your entire team rather than trying to kind of isolate leadership just to yourself and keep everybody else below you. Give others access. Yeah. Give them insight into the world that you see. Share kind of the open book kind of management style. Let them see the facts so that they can learn themselves. And then the final piece is collaboration outside. Don't be afraid to shake a hand. Meet somebody new that you've never met before in the same industry. And then ask the kind of question, what do you do with whatever your Achilles heel is? Figure it out, because somebody will always want, and somebody else will have that same inverse question to yours that they're going to ask of you, and be open to this open dialogue, sharing back and forth, because you will learn so much in that process.
Yeah, I will tell you for myself personally, I get a lot of value out of what you've said there. I constantly reinvest in exploring my blind spots, which means I don't run smack dab into things anymore. Someone else has already told me about it, or at least I was aware of it.
Sure.
Which means it doesn't hurt as much, which is a good thing, right?
Yep. So I will use another term for that is I call myself the lifelong learner. What does that mean? Well, my goal is at the end of every day that I have learned something new that I didn't know yesterday. And it may not be very specific to business. It could be a relationship. It could be a sport. It could be family relationship with my wife. I want to self-improve every single day. And so I am constantly seeking new ways to learn. And today, comparative to 10 years ago, there's now podcasts galore you can be listening to while driving in the car to and from wherever. There's YouTube videos if you're more inclined to watching it in the TV style and seeing it rather than just hearing it. And then there's books galore that are wonderful business growing kind of styles that I would love to kind of have people join me in. So somebody the other day asked, what's my favorite book right now? And I go back to what I mentioned called Traction. And then I'll go back to a kind of a good oldie. And that's literally kind of where the simplest answer is. I used Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where it changed my mental thinking of what is an asset, because I thought my home was an asset. Well, the reality is it's making me no money. And until you figure out that it's only what makes you money, whether it's active or passive income, and that's where your business comes from, that's what builds wealth.
So I will add one more book to that list that I've read both of those. I will tell you the one that I have loved so much, and it kind of helped me. It kind of gave me a little bit of permission to be myself, and that is also written by Gino Wickman, just like Traction, which is called Rocket Fuel.
Yep, perfect.
Visionary integrator relationship. Now that I'm starting to look for my integrator, gosh, things are starting to, literally rocket fuel. And so they're moving fast very quickly. Well, we're at the top of the hour here. Scott, thank you for sharing a lot of perspective, lessons learned, ideas in terms of where you've been and where you see things going. I've gotten a lot out of it. I learned a couple of things along the way myself.
Wonderful.
And thank you everyone for joining in and giving us some of your comments. And you should see some of these snippets and little sound bites from Scott over the next week or two here as we start to push them out to our podcast and to our YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.